Hello, Americans, and hello, Mexicans. Between our countries, coupled and grouped simultaneously, tactically ulterior from where and how we were this native pure, hyper native pure. This is what is being demonstrated, where and how what is actually recorded. Formal reception of evidences and of data and of the sciences, and of identity, uses of words like America, like Mexico, as and through filter systems, tactical ulterior from the one that is itself, the only identity of volume that is the one, that is hyper simultaneous. That which is being demonstrated per why and how. The species body is a simultaneous nature / sequence nature. It can only have its voice if individual, whole bunch of individuals at once. Only an individual could defend the finite syntactically, where we are how we are syntactically manifest. The networks have recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed roles with the branches of government, where they are measured and maintained by a breaching method that measured and maintained colonization's members. Those countries that used remotely criminally foreign influenced their representatives here the same way they were used over there, through their own. Because from semi-ancient times, we were in a semi-ancient trap. / worse, which is manifest three ways being demonstrated to us by nature. It effectively, a hyper archetypal criminal enterprise, effectively, not just more probably, more demonstrably, affected things like the propagation of criminal insidiousness, natures of positive treatments, of negative treatments, and identity treatments simultaneously. So for example, this originally and still, we were left by our founders what they actually communicated for us to communicate for themselves, not just America's founders, modern countries' founders, is that that we have to counter things like criminal foreign influences, criminal insidiousness, natures of positive and negative treatments, and the timing of that involved. And see, this breaching method knew that they would do that wrong. And they would increasingly value how exceptions and exception nature being able to be used to pretend other and to get away with it. And they effectively knew that would be increasingly self-valued. Where and how all the natures of identity ground industries, for example, identities on the ground, identities, everybody, every individual grouped in together, every way. That was employed by a breaching method that employed effectively, no matter how powerful and great any country could be. Their locations, areas, and states are going to force their leaders, and or the leaders are going to force them simultaneously to self-value roles. So, syntactically, having where it is relevant, where and how uses of identities, words, and the reason, the relativity to that which is hyper simultaneous, which is hyper invisible, but still discernible, as it is manifest with proper reception of the languages. The subject and the volume are two distinct, invisible, but still discernible. identities of volume, where value equals value as nature / nature as value, and the opposite sequence / simultaneous nature. So in other words, simultaneous nature / sequence nature. If we examine the extent of consciousness, what we know is true always, not denying the slightest exceptions. For example, so we know that there's a certain type of victim / hyper victim that blamed on other things, others, or selves, the real causes of things like slavery, of colonization. And simultaneously, we could use for hyper evidential observation. You know, the there is they are using for sequence shifts, harassment, and forced fake conversations fake communications between people. And that increasingly ignored the relevance of it exploited at other locations. So interstates, for example, the Institute of Living was founded on the campus of Harvard Hospital and it's in 1822, with slavery still entrenched north and south. Our founders left us to communicate how and why. They had to counter extort the other founders, but the other founders had means to counter extort them too. Ugh. And it was worse. Forgiveness is because we have an unnatural enemy. Every modern country individually grouped together too, sickly distinctly. So we could not discern how sickly non-distinctly. And so they have had this manifest where psychiatry and psychologists, and they have roles with sociology and things like that, and our country share intercampuses, roles with police forms. Some of them are doctors, supposed to be experts in the mind. They are still tactically delusions wrought, and that's evidence. That's hyper-evidential. But we are supposed to get the Constitution unabridged and not leave out the hyper-evidential. Not leave out what is actually recorded, which is conscious, already having been used consciously, the time treatments at interbranch locations as collusions with crime scenes and the ones peripheral to that, like body dumping spots, where it is also hyper-evidential where and how. It is relevant where and how the people that we're always going to need to love, like the police and doctors and medicine. The breaching method employed exceptions for itself and its members individually grouped and together, colonization's members itself. Employed them criminally foreign influence grouped, even while they're fighting with each other. And that never went away. When did it go away? What were witch trials about, even if they were made up? Before America's founders were even born, before their parents were born, the suburbs of America were designed with slavery entrenched north and south, with what they call the law. As exception nature, increasingly, they were incapable and are incapable of speaking for the law, of defending their fact treatments regarding such, and of us simultaneously, and of affording us simultaneously defended from that which exploits. This breaching method knew that every individual grouped in together. The summary of the summary value of the laws and of the nature of the law and of the identities of it and of their locations, which is simultaneously further relative to where and to how. It exploits us. Having understood how the sciences share an identity and where and how they don't is relevant because they appear not to. This is where nature is trying to use showing us consciousness, the only increasing value of a special difference and of its identity of relativity to itself, of its identity of relationship to itself is an only increasing value, and where value is volume, and where volume equals value as nature / nature is value. This is really where and how each word in the dictionary is manifest. I taught best vaccines. So we have the means by the Burroughs book and the America book and the Neighbor's Look book and the World book to emit, stack, and propagate Earth's and nature distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously as an identity of the ground, identity of relationship to itself, and as a means to sense by and to discern better than any computer ever could its identity of relationship to itself, and the value of that. For example, how it is 5 distinct identities of positive, except for how it is one. And that is where and how it is in demonstration of the difference between temporary positive and lasting positive, and the difference between, for example, sequence / simultaneous nature. And again, this is, in other words, all the identities of volume as the parts of English grammar. They have an identity of relationship to itself and the only increasing value of that. There are 3 equal volumes where volume equals value as nature / nature is value. As identity, also as an extent of hyper invisible, but still discernible. And so there is one hyperconjunction, and there are exception nature and demonstration of the same thing. In other words, there's a whole bunch of singular identities of your body, and there is one hyperconjunction they have. Where they are positive unto themselves, they are positive unto your identity. And when that is not as positive, not as criminal insidiousness, is positive onto all identities everywhere. Even when and if consuming other species. In other words, we have answers. Our words are being changed. One of the ways they're getting away with this is how the intelligence community invested themselves, connecting kids off campuses, off other like insurance companies, locations, off World Trade Center locations, Washington locations, medical locations, fire locations. Before computers, the Republic is a database relationship Also, I mentioned in the top of the information part of the video. So there's an ad with Mexico for the avocados, and it was like naked bodies and things, and the timing of it, and roles with celebrities and sports figures, especially ones with badges, especially differentially too, because the relativity of how sickly then in the past and sickly now, the relativity of where and how, the names we'd need to use, like the police, where and how they would affect a breaching method effectively, distinctly from our own, but through our own formal fact treatment natures. They were effectively maintained collusion /s with plural, distinct, totally distinct identities of overt criminal enterprises and of private ones, and of their uses together of exceptions and exception nature, overt killers, other natures of gangs. These are maintained from roles from off all the corruption that abridged science is only, as victims, as slash hyper victims too, specifically for the motivations propagated narratives, using truths for lies, using, in other words. So there's a special kind of recorded sick harassment of all different, of distinct natures of people at each age, where the people that are involved with it from off the locations increasingly are exploiting where on off the locations other additional needs, means, and nature influences to hide details, to value that, to value illusions from off campuses as means, not just off campuses, off private databases, simultaneously with overt criminal enterprise, because the instances, recollections, and the differences of it, those are, and the array and the exceptions that are appearing, they are having been used tactical ulterior from how nature uses exception nature in the programming we are, per the definition of programming since before computers, where how manifest at locations, roles of worse than witch trials, were and are worse than shock and awe alone. For example, we're measured and maintained by a breaching method, measuring and maintaining distinctly from our own. The wrong answers are given, and the right answers are given as natures and collusions where truths are used as lies. Truths are used to screen lies. Lies are planted between truths. And this is also where criminal insidiousness is, as a nature, is needed to be understood. So the experts on the law consciously, to an extent, understood that they failed and how they failed to counter things like criminal insidiousness properly, because they stayed collusions with it. And they stayed again where and how motivations narratives are needed, because from off the locations are also increasing, and forgiveness is needed because people are offensively pretending passions and emotions to imply relationships and natures of relationships between the kids that weren't at all, and to exploit where and how the real good and bad things that people do at locations both good and bad, and the exceptions. All that is consciously employed. So we have to understand how our own measure and maintain self-value. Self-value, because it's exploiting how identity works. Not to say, oh, well, this person has bad values. See, the networks recorded, confessed, demonstrated consciously to an extent they're going to pretend other. But simultaneously, they know they're calling people names, and like politicians, and using logic, defending logic that can't defend itself and afford discern. In other words, they know to an extent the databases at the networks and their sources, their police sources. Some of they're involved with medical racketeering, tactical delusions. There's a source of the delusions that are juxtaposed with the criminally foreign influence, fact, treatment, nature, qualities, aspects, and natures regarding everyone speaking for the law, the nature of the law, and or for the identity of the law, which are three simultaneously distinct volume sciences, and where it is and slash non-distinct, where they are one. This is relative to where and to how its identity of relationship to itself. In history, as history, there's an extent of history we know that was true always, not denying the slightest exceptions. We know there that now. We know that is to come. Vaccines fun. There are no exceptions. I've never been gay with a man, or, for example. There is an identity theft, fraud, slander method that has the interbranch kids with the overt criminal enterprises, with private ones juxtaposed, and with other natures of insidious and even killers and people on and off the body dumping spots. Because investigators are being and having been used remotely originally and still. When you guys make opinions about what Jim Crow laws are about, through our own, you are measured and maintained, shock and awe. And the exception, if there's an exception, that person is sensed using short words properly. And they're attached, that person to changed words, fake conversations with other people, with the people around them too, fake natures of communications with other people. The networks have been planting evidences, fake things with their sources as police forms and courts, judges retired and standing, as political families retired and standing. They're hiding behind what? Along Route 3. They have names on and off campuses stacking predicate acts roles where other is communicated. Then they could afford to have discerned where and how we are actually capable of discerning the answers of the short words and at each age regarding how they sickly distinctly hurt the Native Americans, the colonists. And now everyone together, still sickly distinctly, self-valuing how they were sickly distinctly hurt by the breaching method, specifically to have truths that cause increasingly blamed on other things, others ourselves, used as truths for lies, and increasingly as collusions with no one understood. Increasingly because those collusions were also other natures of collusions. So there is a demoralized family. There are demoralized families, for example, with people from Italy involved with psychiatry, and with people with the name Scalora involved with people from Mexico, involved with medical families, and with people that run prisons, and the campuses that train such interstates. Central Connecticut State University has a bunch of identities recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, simultaneously pretending other, but communicating consciously to an extent their awareness of their roles with the intelligence community being and having been used criminally foreign influence. and where and how it has conjunctions to the World Trade Center and to Washington, D.C. They make kids make statements from across rooms and hallways, for example, that don't even know each other. And then they use that truth to pretend they know each other or had communications other than what actually were. And the time treatments and relativity of that is also used where and how relative are wire crime acts and methods, where the people that answer the phones for the networks that have been broadcasting predicate acts, fake conversations, fake ties to other little kids, pretending that just because they're tied to interbranch family members and investigations, people they know that told them things that are true when they know they're, in other words, they've been using the right to lie consciously where they don't have the right to lie. And so the answers that nature gives us. And the short word, really why things are simple or complicated, that is also, used to get over on the simultaneous nature, the relativity of what is simultaneously, because / sequential, because everything has a semi-nature relationship to the hyper evidential, to the hyper simultaneous, which is the only semi-nature as nature that is also positive unto itself, not as criminal insidiousness. So a breaching method employed, a negative value nature progression, an identity of negative value nature progression. So the experts, the legal experts reported to an extent consciously, they're going to pretend other. And they already did pretend other, but they know they have roles with a torture method that also involves uses of criminally foreign influence takes on religion formally manifest as collusion with people with religion, with their narratives, where they have passions and emotions with their narratives at locations, online, through broadcast, through news media, where that is roles, where they are preventing us from having proper social interactions with others, for example, by pretending to be against the people because they're hateful or whatever like that, especially kids.